During the funeral of a beautiful woman, a rare horse climbs onto the coffin. When they discovered the reason, everyone was left speechless. Before watching this account, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more animal stories. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Sarah opened her eyes, feeling the familiar scent of damp earth and fresh grass that invaded her room through the slightly open window. Hope Ranch, her home since birth, was slowly awakening to another day of work and challenges. She stretched in bed, allowing herself a few more seconds of laziness before facing the routine that awaited her. At 32, Sarah was the living image of determination. Her brown hair, usually tied in a practical ponytail, framed a face with strong features and green eyes that seemed to carry all the wisdom of the countryside. Heir to one of the largest horse breeding ranches in Texas, she carried on her shoulders not only the responsibility of maintaining her family's legacy, but also the dream of expanding and innovating the business. Quickly dressing in her work clothes, jeans, leather boots, and a faded plaid shirt, Sarah descended the stairs of the main house, a century-old building that blended the robustness of colonial architecture with modern touches that she herself had implemented over the years. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Johnson, the housekeeper who was practically her second mother, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, my flower," Mrs. Johnson greeted with her warm smile. "Are you going to run off without eating anything again?" Sarah smiled, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "I'm just going to take a quick look at the stables, Mrs. J. I'll be back for breakfast, I promise." Crossing the large yard that separated the house from the stables, Sarah took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the pure morning air. The property stretched for acres of green pastures, surrounded by gentle hills that faded into the horizon. It was a breathtaking scene, but her eyes were searching for something specific: Thunder. Thunder was more than just Hope Ranch's prize stallion. He was the heart and soul of the place. A magnificent animal, with a coat as black as night and a white star on his forehead, he possessed a unique genetic lineage that made him extremely valuable. But for Sarah, his value went far beyond money. Thunder was her companion, her silent confidant, the strongest link that connected her to memories of her father. As she approached the main stable, Sarah noticed something strange. The door was ajar, and an unusual silence hung in the air. Normally, at this hour, the workers would already be in full swing tending to the animals. With her heart racing, she quickened her pace. "Thunder," she called, her voice echoing through the empty stable corridor. A low neigh responded from the back, and Sarah ran there. Thunder was in his stall, but something was wrong. The animal seemed agitated, his large, expressive eyes fixed on her with an almost human intensity. "What's wrong, old boy?" Sarah murmured, stroking the horse's neck. It was then that she noticed there were strange marks on Thunder's coat, as if someone had tried to take samples of his blood or skin. A chill ran down her spine. Who would do this? And why? The questions piled up in her mind when she heard footsteps rapidly approaching. "Sarah, thank God you're here." It was the voice of Jake, her foreman and longtime friend. He seemed out of breath and worried. "Something terrible has happened." Sarah turned, fear growing in her chest. "What is it, Jake? What's going on?" Jake hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "You better see for yourself. In the main house, your Aunt Barbara is there with a lawyer." The name of her aunt made Sarah frown. Barbara, her late father's sister, had never been close to the family. Her visits were rare and usually brought problems. What would she be doing there, early in the morning with a lawyer? "I'll head there right away," Sarah said, taking one last look at Thunder. "Keep an eye on him, Jake." Something's not right. As she walked back to the house, Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The ranch, the animals, the employees, everything depended on her. And now, with this unexpected visit and the strange events in the stable, she knew a storm was approaching. As she entered the living room, Sarah was greeted by a tense silence. Her Aunt Barbara, a middle-aged woman with impeccably styled grey hair, was sitting on the sofa, a cold smile on her lips. Beside her, a man in a dark suit held a leather briefcase. "Ah, Sarah, darling," Barbara said, her voice too sweet to be sincere. "It's good of you to join us. We have important matters to discuss." Sarah crossed her arms, suddenly feeling vulnerable in her work clothes. "What's this about, Aunt Barbara?" The lawyer cleared his throat, opening his briefcase. Miss Sarah, I'm Mr. Thompson, your Aunt Barbara's legal representative. We're here to discuss, well, the future of Hope Ranch. The words fell like lightning on Sarah. The future of the ranch? What did that mean? What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Barbara stood up, walking to the window with studied elegance. My dear, your father and my brother made some mistakes in the last years of his life. Debts, poorly made contracts. The situation is more complicated than you imagine. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Her father had always been a careful and honest administrator. How could he have left the ranch in a complicated situation? That's impossible, she protested. I know every inch of this ranch, every account, every animal. We don't have any debts. Mr. Thompson intervened, his voice monotonous and impersonal. Unfortunately, miss, there are documents that prove otherwise. Your Aunt Barbara, as your father's only sister, has legal rights to part of the property. And given the circumstances, she is proposing a restructuring. Sarah looked from Barbara to the lawyer, feeling cornered. What kind of restructuring? Barbara turned to her, her eyes gleaming with poorly disguised ambition. Nothing drastic, dear. Just a more equitable division of assets. After all, this ranch is also part of my family heritage. The implications of those words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Her aunt wanted to take part of the ranch, maybe even sell it. Everything she and her father had worked for was at risk. This is ridiculous, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions. I won't allow you to destroy my father's legacy. This ranch is my life, my home. Barbara shrugged, a gesture of false compassion. I understand your feelings, Sarah, but business is business. And believe me, I have grand plans for this place. At that moment, as if sensing the tension in the air, a powerful neigh echoed from outside. Thunder. Sarah looked out the window, seeing the magnificent animal galloping freely across the pasture, his black mane dancing in the wind. It was a reminder, a call. Hope Ranch wasn't just a piece of land or a business. It was a home, a story, a promise. And Sarah was determined to fight for it with all her strength. This isn't over, she said, turning to face her aunt and the lawyer. You don't know this land like I do. You don't know what it means. And I promise I won't give up without a fight. With those words, Sarah left the room, leaving behind a surprised Barbara and a disconcerted lawyer. Outside, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the green fields of Hope Ranch. A battle had begun, and Sarah knew she would need all her courage and wit to win. As she walked towards the stables, she made a silent promise to herself, to her father, and to Thunder. Hope Ranch would remain intact, no matter the cost. The sun was already high when Sarah finally got a moment of peace. After the tumultuous meeting with her Aunt Barbara, she had spent the following hours in a marathon of phone calls and document reviews, trying to understand the situation she found herself in. Now sitting on the porch of the main house, she stared at the horizon with a distant look, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. You have that same look your father had when he was deep in thought, said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Mr. Jenkins, the ranch's oldest employee, approaching with slow but steady steps. Jenkins was a legendary figure at Hope Ranch. At 78, he knew every story, every secret of these lands. His eyes, framed by deep wrinkles, had the gleam of wisdom that only time can provide. Mr. Jenkins, Sarah smiled, feeling some of the weight on her shoulders dissipate. You always show up when I need you most. The old man sat down beside her, his eyes scanning the familiar landscape. I heard about your aunt's visit. Bad news travels fast, even in a place this big. Sarah sighed, putting the cup aside. She says my father left debts. That part of the ranch belongs to her. But it doesn't make sense, Mr. Jenkins. Dad would never do something like that without telling me. Jenkins was silent for a moment, as if weighing his next words. Your father was a good man, Sarah. But even the best men can make mistakes when pressured. What do you mean? Sarah asked, feeling a chill in the pit of her stomach. The old employee adjusted himself in the chair, his gaze lost in distant memories. A few years before passing, your father faced tough times. A terrible drought, sick animals. He fought tooth and nail to keep the ranch standing. Sarah listened attentively, vaguely remembering that period. She was younger then, focused on her veterinary studies, not fully understanding the challenges her father was facing. There was a man, Jenkins continued, his voice low, an investor from the city. He offered help, money to get through the crisis. Your father was reluctant, but in the end, well, sometimes we make tough choices for the greater good. Sarah's heart raced. Are you saying my father really made shady deals? That he got into debt? Jenkins shook his head. I'm saying your father did what he thought was necessary to save this place, but the price, maybe it was higher than he imagined. At that moment, a familiar neigh cut through the air. Thunder was galloping across the nearby pasture, his majestic figure catching the sunlight. Sarah watched him, feeling a mixture of admiration and concern. Thunder, murmured Jenkins, a smile on his lips. That horse is special, you know, more than anyone imagines. Sarah nodded, remembering the strange marks she had noticed on the animal earlier. Something's wrong, Mr. Jenkins. It's not just my aunt's visit. I found Thunder agitated this morning, with strange marks. As if someone had tried to take samples from him, Jenkins completed, surprising Sarah. How do you know? She asked, perplexed. The old man sighed deeply. Because it's not the first time this has happened. Your father, he discovered something about Thunder, something that could change everything. That's why that horse is so valuable. Sarah stood up, adrenaline rushing through her veins. What are you talking about, Mr. Jenkins? What secret is this? Before the old man could answer, the sound of an approaching car caught both their attention. A sleek, expensive sports car was parking in front of the house. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized the driver getting out of the car. Ryan, she whispered, a mixture of conflicting emotions in her voice. Ryan Maxwell was her ex-boyfriend, a successful businessman from the city. Tall, athletic, and with a charming smile, he was the embodiment of urban success. His relationship with Sarah had been intense but turbulent, ending almost a year ago when their visions for the future proved incompatible. Sarah, Ryan exclaimed, approaching with open arms. It's been a while. You look as beautiful as ever. Sarah crossed her arms, maintaining a cautious distance. Ryan, what are you doing here? His smile faltered for an instant. I came as soon as I heard about the problems. I thought I could help. Jenkins stood up silently, giving Sarah a meaningful look before walking away. She understood the message. Be careful. How did you find out? Sarah asked, her voice laden with suspicion. Ryan shrugged, his charm back in place. I have my contacts. Look, I know we didn't end things on the best terms, but I still care about you, Sarah. And about this place. He made a sweeping gesture, indicating the ranch. I can't stand to see you lose all of this. Sarah felt a pang of nostalgia. There was a time when she blindly trusted Ryan, when she saw him as a partner for the future. But things had changed. I appreciate the concern, she said, keeping her tone neutral. But I can handle this on my own. Ryan moved closer, his eyes fixed on hers. It doesn't have to be this way, Sarah. Together, we could transform this ranch into something incredible. Modernize, expand. Imagine the possibilities. For a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself to visualize it. A modern hope ranch, profitable, secure, without worries, without threats of losing everything. It was tempting. But then, as if responding to her thoughts, another neigh from Thunder echoed through the air. Sarah looked in the direction of the sound and saw the magnificent animal standing at the edge of the pasture, his intelligent eyes fixed on her. No, she said firmly, turning back to Ryan. I appreciate the offer, but no. This ranch doesn't need to be transformed into something else. It's perfect as it is. Ryan stepped back, a shadow of disappointment and something else, frustration, crossing his face. You've always been stubborn, Sarah. But think about it, things are changing, you might not have a choice. With those enigmatic words, he turned and walked back to his car. Sarah watched him leave, a mixture of relief and apprehension in her chest. Something about Ryan's visit deeply troubled her. When the car disappeared down the dirt road, Sarah found herself alone again on the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange. In the distance, Thunder was still watching her, like a silent guardian. At that moment, Sarah made a decision. There was much more to this story than it appeared. Secrets about her father, about Thunder, about the true reason behind the threats to the ranch. And she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. With decisive steps, she headed to the stables. It was time for a serious conversation with Jake, her foreman. If there was anyone who could help her unravel the mysteries of Hope Ranch, it was him. As she walked, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but also a renewed determination. This was her land, her heritage, her home, and she would fight with all her strength to protect it. The wind blew, bringing the smell of earth and freedom. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling connected to every grain of sand, every blade of grass on Hope Ranch. Whatever challenge came next, she would be ready. Twilight was already tinting the sky with shades of purple when Sarah reached the stables. The familiar smell of hay and leather enveloped her, bringing a sense of comfort amid the day's turbulence. She found Jake checking the stalls, his tanned face furrowed in concentration. "Jake," Sarah called, making him turn quickly. "Sarah," he responded, a tired smile on his lips. "I figured you'd come." There was something in Jake's expression that made her hesitate. The two had grown up together on the ranch, Jake a few years older, always like a protective brother. Now as foreman, he was her right-hand man, the person she trusted most after her father. "We need to talk," said Sarah, looking around to ensure they were alone. "About Thunder, about my father, about everything that's happening." Jake nodded gravely, guiding her to a more secluded corner of the stable. "I knew this day would come," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. "Jake, what do you know?" The foreman took a deep breath, running his hand through his dark hair. "Sarah, your father, he confided in me before passing, made me promise I'd take care of you and the ranch. But he also asked me to keep certain secrets until the right time." Sarah felt a mixture of surprise and frustration. "And you think now is the right time, with everything that's happening?" "Maybe it's too late," Jake admitted, guilt evident in his voice. "But you need to know. It all started about 5 years ago when your father discovered something special about Thunder. At that moment, as if he had heard his name, the imposing stallion neighed from his stall." Sarah and Jake turned to look at him, seeing his intelligent eyes fixed on them. Jake continued, "Thunder isn't just an exceptional horse, Sarah. He possesses a unique genetic characteristic, something that's never been seen before in equines. His blood, well, it has almost miraculous properties." Sarah blinked, incredulous. "What are you talking about?" "Accelerated cellular regeneration," Jake explained, his voice low and urgent. "So your father discovered it by chance, when Thunder recovered from an injury that should have left him permanently lame. The tests we did in secret, the results were unbelievable." Sarah's mind was spinning. This would explain her aunt's sudden interest in the ranch, the attempts to collect samples from Thunder. But why did my father keep this secret? Why didn't he disclose the discovery? Jake shook his head. He feared the consequences. Imagine the frenzy it would cause. Pharmaceutical companies, governments, all wanting to exploit Thunder. Your father wanted to protect him, study more in depth before making any decision. And that's when things went wrong, Sarah concluded, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. "The investor Mr. Jenkins mentioned." "Exactly," Jake confirmed. "Someone found out, offered money in exchange for participation in the research. Your father initially refused, but with the drought and financial problems..." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the revelation. Her father, always so upright, forced to make concessions to save the ranch and protect Thunder. "Who was this investor, Jake?" she asked, fearing the answer. Jake hesitated, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. "I never saw him personally, but I heard your father mention him. A Mr. Maxwell." Sarah's blood ran cold. Maxwell. Ryan's last name. Could it be possible? Before she could process this information, a noise from the stable entrance interrupted them. Both turned to see a figure approaching in the shadows. "Sorry," said a familiar voice. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Ryan emerged from the gloom, his charming smile contrasting with the tension in the air. Sarah and Jake exchanged quick glances, uncertain about how much he might have overheard. "Ryan?" Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What are you doing here so late?" He shrugged, casually walking towards them. "I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation earlier. I thought we could continue discussing the ranch's future." There was something in the way he looked at Thunder that made Sarah position herself protectively in front of the horse's stall. "I already said I'm not interested in selling or transforming the ranch, Ryan," she stated, more firmly this time. Ryan sighed, his gaze becoming more intense. "Sarah, you don't understand the potential you have here. This ranch, these animals, and especially Thunder. Think about the lives we could change, the good we could do." The way he mentioned Thunder confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Ryan knew. Maybe he had always known. "How do you know about Thunder?" she asked directly, abandoning any pretense. Ryan's smile faltered for an instant. "Come on, Sarah. We're all adults here. Your father wasn't the only one with keen eyes for unique opportunities." Jake took a step forward, his posture protective. "I think it's best you leave, Ryan. This conversation is over." Ryan looked from Jake to Sarah, his charm giving way to something colder, more calculating. "This is far from over. You have no idea what's at stake here. Hope Ranch, Thunder. All of this is bigger than you can imagine." With those enigmatic words, he turned to leave. But before going, he cast one last look at Sarah. "Think carefully, Sarah. The offer is still on the table. Together we could make history." When Ryan finally departed, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. She turned to Jake, seeing in him the same mixture of concern and determination she felt. "What do we do now?" asked Jake, his voice low. Sarah looked at Thunder, who was watching them with his intelligent eyes. She reached out, stroking the animal's muzzle. "Now," she said firmly, "we fight. For this ranch, for Thunder, for my father's legacy, no matter what comes our way." As the last ray of sunlight disappeared on the horizon, Sarah felt a resolution growing within her. The secrets had been revealed, the threats were clear. But she wasn't alone in this battle. With Jake by her side, Thunder under her care, and her father's memory guiding her, she would face whatever fate had in store. Night fell over Hope Ranch, bringing with it the promise of turbulent days. But in the shadows of the stables, a light of hope shone. Sarah knew that no matter how difficult the path ahead, she would fight with all her strength to protect her home and the extraordinary secret it held. Dawn arrived at Hope Ranch, bringing with it a palpable tension in the air. Sarah had spent the night wide awake, her mind filled with worries and plans. Yesterday's revelations weighed on her shoulders, but also ignited a flame of determination in her chest. Sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of strong coffee in her hands, she watched the movement of employees outside. The ranch was waking up to another day of work, oblivious to the conflicts unfolding behind the scenes. "Good morning, my flower," said Mrs. Johnson, entering the kitchen with her usual flowery apron. "Looks like it wasn't the best night, was it?" Sarah managed a tired smile. "We have a lot to worry about, Mrs. J." The old housekeeper sat beside her, her wise eyes studying the face of the young woman she had watched grow up. "You know, your mother used to say that problems are like storm clouds. They seem scary when they're over our heads, but they always pass." "What if this time is different?" Sarah asked, her voice betraying a touch of vulnerability. "What if I'm not strong enough to face this?" Mrs. Johnson took Sarah's hands in hers, calloused from a lifetime of work. "Listen well, girl. You have your father's strength and your mother's heart. There's no storm you can't face." At that moment, the sound of an approaching car caught both their attention. Sarah stood up, her body tense, ready for another confrontation. But as she looked out the window, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "It's Emma," she exclaimed, running to the door. Emma Parker was Sarah's best friend since high school. A brilliant lawyer, she had built a successful career in the city, but never forgot her roots in the countryside. Seeing her get out of the car, with her leather briefcase and wide smile, was like a ray of sunshine amid the dark clouds. "Sarah!" Emma shouted, hugging her friend tightly. "I came as soon as I got your message. What's going on?" Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Emma, you have no idea how happy I am to see you. Let's go inside, we have a lot to talk about." In the following hours, Sarah brought Emma up to speed on everything: her Aunt Barbara's threats, the supposed debts left by her father, Thunder's secret, and Ryan's advances. Emma listened attentively, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is more complicated than I imagined," Emma finally said, flipping through some notes she had made. "But it's not impossible to solve. First, we need to verify the legitimacy of these documents your aunt presented. Then we'll investigate this Maxwell investor and his connection to Ryan. Sarah nodded, feeling for the first time in days that she had a concrete plan. And what about Thunder? How can we protect him? Emma reflected for a moment. Ideally, we'd patent the discovery, but that would make everything public. For now, the best protection is secrecy. We need to ensure that no one else discovers about his special properties. The sound of hooves hitting the ground interrupted the conversation. Through the window, they saw Jake arriving on horseback, his face a mask of concern. "Sarah," he called, quickly dismounting. "We have a problem. I found more marks on Thunder. Someone was in the stables during the night." Sarah's heart raced. She exchanged a quick look with Emma before running outside towards the stables. Arriving there, she found Thunder agitated in his stall, neighing nervously. "Shh, it's okay," Sarah murmured, stroking the animal's neck. Examining him closely, she saw the marks, small points where blood samples had been collected. "Who would do this?" Emma asked, shocked. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they know the ranch well. The security cameras were disabled during the night." Sarah felt a wave of anger and frustration. "Ryan," she muttered. "It has to be him." "We can't accuse anyone without proof," Emma warned, "but this shows we need to act quickly. Sarah, I think it's time to consider more drastic measures." "What kind of measures?" Sarah asked, still caressing Thunder to calm him. Emma hesitated for a moment. "Maybe it's time to make the discovery about Thunder public. In a controlled way, of course. If we do this the right way, we can protect him and the ranch at the same time." The suggestion caught Sarah by surprise. Revealing Thunder's secret was exactly what her father feared. But now, with so many threats piling up, maybe it was the only way out. "We need to think this through carefully," Jake intervened. "Once the news spreads, there's no going back." Sarah looked at Thunder, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. "Give me until tomorrow," she finally said. "I need to think, consult with Mr. Jenkins. He knew my father's plans better than anyone." Emma nodded, placing a comforting hand on her friend's shoulder. "Of course, Sarah. Meanwhile, I'll start preparing our legal defense. Whatever decision we make, we'll be ready." As the group left the stables, none of them noticed the figure hidden in the shadows, observing every move with attentive eyes. The news of Emma's arrival and the discussions about revealing Thunder's secret would soon reach interested ears, once again changing the power game unfolding at Hope Ranch. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. With Ryan's help, Sarah and her team managed to trace the origin of the accusations to an international pharmaceutical conglomerate. The evidence was clear: forged documents, bought witnesses, a coordinated smear campaign. As the truth came to light, the scenario began to change. Journalists who were once skeptical now became allies, eager to expose the true conspiracy. Public opinion, which had turned against Hope Ranch, now saw it as a victim of an unscrupulous corporate plot. At the end of that exhausting day, Sarah found herself once again in the stables with Thunder. The horse seemed to sense the change in the air, his behavior calmer and more confident. "We've weathered another one, friend," she murmured, stroking the animal's neck. "But the battle isn't over yet." A soft neigh was Thunder's response, as always understanding every word. As she watched the sun set through the stable window, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Betrayal had come from where she least expected, but support had also emerged from unexpected places. Ryan, whom she thought was an adversary, had proved to be a valuable ally. Night was falling over Hope Ranch, bringing with it a calm after the storm. But Sarah knew this was just a pause. The challenges would continue, perhaps even greater now that they had messed with powerful interests. Returning to the main house, she found Emma, Jake, and to her surprise Ryan still working in the makeshift office. "You don't need to stay," she said, noticing the fatigue on their faces. "You've already done so much today." Emma smiled, raising a cup of coffee. "And miss all the fun? No way, we're in this together, Sarah." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for her friends and allies. Despite the challenges ahead, she knew she wasn't alone. With Thunder's secret still safe and a team of dedicated people by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As the night deepened, Sarah stepped out onto the porch, looking out over the moonlit pastures of Hope Ranch. The air was crisp and filled with the sounds of nocturnal wildlife. In the distance, she could make out Thunder's silhouette, standing like a sentinel in the moonlight. "We're going to get through this," she whispered to herself, her voice carried away by the gentle breeze. "We have to." The next few days were a blur of activity. Emma worked tirelessly on legal strategies, while Jake increased security measures around the ranch. Ryan, much to Sarah's surprise, proved to be an invaluable asset, using his business connections to gather intelligence on the pharmaceutical company threatening them. It was on a particularly tense afternoon that Mr. Jenkins approached Sarah as she was checking on the horses. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and urgent, "there's something you need to see. It's about your father." Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, Sarah followed the old man to a secluded corner of the barn. "Mr." Jenkins reached behind a loose board and pulled out a weathered leather journal. "Your father gave this to me before he passed," Mr. Jenkins explained, handing the journal to Sarah. "He said I'd know when the time was right to give it to you. I think that time is now." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the journal. Inside, she found detailed notes about Thunder's unique abilities, experimental data, and most surprisingly, a letter addressed to her. As she read her father's words, tears began to form in her eyes. He explained everything: the discovery, the pressure from investors, his fears for the future. But most importantly, he expressed his unwavering faith in Sarah's ability to protect Thunder and the ranch. "He knew," Sarah whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. "He knew this day would come." Mr. Jenkins nodded solemnly. "Your father was a wise man, Sarah. He prepared for every eventuality." Armed with this new information and her father's encouragement, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She gathered her team, Emma, Jake, Ryan, and Mr. Jenkins, to formulate a plan. "We're not just fighting for the ranch anymore," Sarah declared, her voice steady and determined. "We're fighting for a discovery that could change the world. But we need to do it right, on our terms." The group spent hours strategizing, weighing their options, and preparing for every possible scenario. As dawn broke, they had a solid plan in place. They would go public with Thunder's abilities, but on their own terms. Emma would handle the legal aspects, ensuring that the ranch retained control of the research. Ryan would use his business acumen to secure ethical partnerships for further study. Jake would oversee security, protecting Thunder and the ranch from those who might seek to exploit the discovery. As for Sarah, she would be the face of Hope Ranch, telling their story to the world and ensuring that her father's legacy and Thunder's gift would be used for the greater good. The day of the announcement arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and trepidation. Journalists from across the country gathered at Hope Ranch, eager to hear the mysterious news that had been hinted at. Standing before the assembled crowd, with Thunder by her side and her friends behind her, Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming," she started, her voice clear and confident. "Today we stand on the brink of a revolutionary discovery, one that could change the face of medical science as we know it." As Sarah unveiled the truth about Thunder and the ranch's plans for the future, she could feel the energy in the air shift. There was excitement, skepticism, and hope all mingled together. Questions flew fast and furious, but Sarah and her team were prepared. They answered with transparency and conviction, laying out their vision for ethical research and responsible use of Thunder's unique abilities. As the press conference wound down, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The secret was out, but it was out on their terms. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in weeks, she felt truly hopeful. In the days that followed, Hope Ranch became the center of a media storm. Scientists, researchers, and pharmaceutical companies from around the world clamored for access to Thunder and the groundbreaking research. But Sarah and her team stood firm, carefully vetting potential partners and collaborators. Emma worked tirelessly to secure patents and establish legal protections for Thunder and the ranch. Jake oversaw the implementation of enhanced security measures, ensuring that Thunder and the other horses were safe from any potential threats. Ryan, leveraging his business connections, helped to navigate the complex world of research funding and ethical partnerships. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Sarah found moments of quiet reflection. One evening, as the sun was setting, She stood in Thunder's stall, gently stroking his mane. "You know, boy," she said softly, "I think Dad would be proud of us. We're doing this the right way." Thunder nickered softly, nuzzling her hand as if in agreement. Just then, Sarah heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Aunt Barbara standing at the stable entrance, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Sarah," Barbara began, her voice lacking its usual sharpness, I owe you an apology." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised by this unexpected turn of events. Barbara continued, "I was so focused on what I thought was best for the ranch, modernization, expansion, that I lost sight of what truly makes this place special." "Your father, he always knew, didn't he?" Sarah nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "He did. He understood that Hope Ranch was more than just a business. It's a legacy, a responsibility." Barbara stepped closer, her eyes misting over. "I see that now, and I see how wrong I was to try and take it from you. Can you forgive me?" For a moment Sarah was silent, processing her aunt's words. Then, slowly, she extended her hand. "It won't be easy, Aunt Barbara, but I'm willing to try. This ranch has always been about family. Maybe it's time we remembered that." As aunt and niece shook hands, Thunder let out a gentle whinny, as if approving of this reconciliation. The weeks turned into months, and Hope Ranch settled into a new normal. The initial frenzy of media attention gradually gave way to focused ethical research. Sarah worked closely with a select team of scientists, always ensuring that Thunder's well-being remained the top priority. The regenerative properties of Thunder's blood were proving to be even more remarkable than initially thought. Early trials showed promising results in treating previously incurable diseases and accelerating healing in severe injuries. Hope Ranch had become a beacon of hope for people around the world. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah was overseeing a group of visiting researchers, she noticed Ryan hanging back from the group, a pensive look on his face. "Everything okay?" she asked, approaching him. Ryan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Just thinking about how far we've come. You know, when I first came back here, I had this grand vision of turning Hope Ranch into a cutting-edge facility, all sleek and modern." Sarah chuckled. "I remember. You were quite persistent." "I was wrong," Ryan admitted. "What you've done here, Sarah, it's so much more than I could have imagined. You've managed to blend the ranch's heritage with groundbreaking science. It's incredible." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thank you, Ryan. That means a lot." As they stood there, looking out over the rolling pastures where horses grazed peacefully alongside state-of-the-art research facilities, Sarah felt a sense of profound gratitude. The path hadn't been easy, but they had stayed true to her father's vision while embracing the extraordinary opportunity they had been given. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. In the distance, Sarah could see Thunder galloping freely, his black coat gleaming in the fading light. She smiled, feeling a deep connection to this land, these animals, and the legacy she was now shaping. You know," she said to Ryan, her voice soft but filled with conviction, "I think this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do, so many more people we can help." Ryan nodded, his eyes reflecting the same determination. "And we'll do it together, you, me, Emma, Jake, the whole team. Hope Ranch is changing the world, Sarah, one hoofbeat at a time." As night fell over Hope Ranch, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The challenges weren't over. There would always be new hurdles to overcome, new discoveries to make. But she was ready for whatever lay ahead. With Thunder's extraordinary gift, her father's guiding wisdom, and the support of her friends and family, Sarah knew that Hope Ranch would continue to be a place of miracles, big and small. In the quiet of the evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Sarah made her way back to the stables for one last check on Thunder. As she approached his stall, she saw him standing alert, his ears pricked forward. "Hey there, big guy," she said softly, reaching out to stroke his nose. "Another day done, huh?" Thunder nickered softly, leaning into her touch. In that moment, Sarah felt a connection that went beyond words, beyond science. This extraordinary horse, with his miraculous blood and gentle spirit, had changed everything. But more than that, he had reminded her of the power of hope, of perseverance, and of staying true to one's values in the face of adversity. As she stood there, Communing silently with Thunder, Sarah heard the faint sound of hoofbeats in the distance. She turned, peering out into the darkness, and saw a sight that took her breath away. A herd of wild horses, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, was galloping across the far pasture. Their manes flew in the wind, their movements a perfect symphony of power and grace. It was a rare sight. These wild herds seldom ventured so close to the ranch. Sarah watched, transfixed, as the wild horses ran. They seemed to embody the very spirit of freedom, of untamed beauty. And yet here was Thunder standing calmly beside her, a bridge between two worlds, the wild and the domesticated, the mysterious and the scientific. In that moment, Sarah understood with perfect clarity the responsibility that rested on her shoulders. Hope Ranch wasn't just about groundbreaking medical research or preserving a family legacy. It was about maintaining a delicate balance between progress and tradition, between human intervention and natural wonder. As the wild horses disappeared into the night, Sarah turned back to Thunder. "We've got a big job ahead of us," she murmured, more to herself than to the horse. "But we're going to do it right." With one last pat on Thunder's neck, Sarah made her way back to the house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new hopes. But for now, in the quiet of the night, under a canopy of stars, all was right with the world at Hope Ranch. As she climbed the porch steps, Sarah paused for a moment, looking back over the moonlit expanse of the ranch. She thought of her father, of the legacy he had left her, and of the future she was building. A future bright with promise, grounded in integrity, and always filled with hope. Sarah